The rope burned against her palms as Miranda Davies pulled with everything she had. Her boots wedged against the wooden beam for leverage while the church bell groaned somewhere above her in the steeple. The afternoon sun beat down on Fort Smith, Arkansas, turning the small church into an oven, and sweat dripped down her face as she struggled with the pulley system that had seized up 3 days ago. The congregation needed that bell working by Sunday, and since her father had been the one who maintained it before his death last winter, the responsibility had somehow fallen to her. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear the footsteps on the wooden floor below until a deep voice called out, "You planning on bringing that whole tower down, or just testing the Lord's patience?" Miranda looked down through the opening in the loft floor to see a tall man standing in the sanctuary, hat in hand, looking up at her with what might have been amusement in his dark eyes. He had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, with sun-bronzed skin and the kind of steady stance that came from years in the saddle. His dark hair was a little too long, curling slightly at his collar, and he wore dusty trail clothes that suggested he had been traveling. "I am managing just fine, thank you," Miranda said, though at that moment the rope slipped through her grip and she had to grab it again quickly to keep from losing all the progress she had made. "Looks like it," the man said, and she could hear the smile in his voice even if she couldn't see it clearly from this angle. "Mind if I come up and lend a hand?" Miranda hesitated. She was 22 years old and had learned to be cautious around strange men, especially since her father's passing had left her and her mother in a vulnerable position. But the bell really did need fixing, and she had been struggling with it for the better part of 2 hours. "If you're offering help, I won't refuse it," she said finally. The man climbed the narrow ladder to the bell tower with an easy athleticism that suggested he was used to physical work. Up close, Miranda could see that he was probably in his mid-20s, with a strong jaw and eyes that were a warm brown with flecks of gold. He had a fading scar along his left cheekbone that gave him a slightly dangerous look, but his expression was open and friendly. "Name's Thomas Barrett," he said, extending his hand. "Most folks call me Tom. I just rode into town about an hour ago." "Miranda Davies," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and calloused. "What brings you to Fort Smith?" "Looking for work, mostly," Tom said, already examining the pulley system with a practiced eye. "Heard there might be some ranches hiring hands for the season, but first I thought I'd pay my respects." He nodded toward the sanctuary below. "My mother always said a man should thank the Lord when he arrives somewhere new and ask for guidance before moving on." Miranda felt some of her wariness ease at that. A man who came to church before seeking work was generally the right sort. "The problem's here," Tom said, pointing to where the rope had gotten twisted around itself inside the pulley wheel. "Looks like someone tried to wring it while it was already jammed, and that just made it worse. We need to climb up higher and free it from above." "I tried that," Miranda admitted. "But I couldn't reach it properly, and I didn't want to lean out too far." "Smart thinking," Tom said approvingly. "Breaking your neck wouldn't help the bell situation much. Here, let me give it a try. I'm a bit taller, might have better reach." He climbed up onto the beam with the kind of confidence that came from years of working at heights, whether in haylofts or on roof repairs. Miranda watched as he carefully worked the twisted rope free, his movements deliberate and sure. Within 10 minutes, he had the rope running smoothly again. "Give it a try now," he called down to her. Miranda pulled the rope, and this time it moved easily. The bell swung and rang out clear and true, the sound echoing across Fort Smith. It was a beautiful sound, one she had missed hearing these past few days. "Oh, thank you," she said, genuine relief in her voice. "I've been fighting with that thing all afternoon. You have no idea what it means to have it working again." "Happy to help," Tom said, climbing back down. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious why you were up here doing it yourself. Doesn't the church have a deacon or someone who handles these things?" Miranda's expression clouded slightly. "We did. My father. He passed last winter, caught pneumonia during a cold snap. Since then, well, things have been a bit disorganized. Reverend Clayton is nearly 70 and can't manage the ladder anymore. The other men in town all have their own work to see to." "I'm sorry about your father," Tom said quietly, and the sympathy in his voice sounded genuine. "Thank you," Miranda said. She busied herself coiling the rope properly. "He was a good man. Helped build this church with his own hands back in '49 when the town was barely more than a trading post. He took care of it like it was a member of the family." "Sounds like he was a man worth knowing," Tom said. He glanced around the small church, taking in the simple wooden pews and the cross that hung behind the pulpit. Everything was clean and well-maintained despite being modest. "You keeping up his work then?" "Trying to," Miranda said. "Along with my mother, we do what we can. I teach at the school 3 days a week, and she takes in sewing. It's enough to get by." They climbed down from the bell tower together, and in the better light of the sanctuary, Miranda could see Tom more clearly. He had an honest face, she decided, with smile lines around his eyes that suggested he laughed often. There was something steady about him, something that made her think of deep roots and clear water. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Barrett," she said formally, brushing dust from her skirt. "It was very kind of you to stop." "Just Tom, please," he said. "And it was my pleasure, though I have to say I've never met a lady who could handle a pulley system like that. You've got a good grip and better determination." Miranda felt herself blush slightly at the compliment. "My father believed girls should know how to fix things as well as boys. He taught me carpentry, basic smithing, all sorts of useful skills. Mother used to despair that he was turning me into a tomboy, but I've found it all comes in handy." "Your mother sounds like a woman worth meeting too," Tom said. He hesitated, then added, "I don't suppose you know of anyone in town who might be looking to hire a ranch hand. I'm good with horses and cattle, can do fence repair, building work, pretty much anything that needs doing." Miranda thought for a moment. "The Hendersons have a spread about 5 miles west of town. They usually hire extra hands in the spring, and old Mr. Crawford, who owns the livery stable, was just saying last week that he needed help. His arthritis has been acting up, making it hard for him to handle some of the bigger horses." "That's helpful, thank you," Tom said. "I'll head over to the livery after I get myself settled. You wouldn't happen to know of a decent boarding house, would you, Mrs.?" "Sullivan runs one on Main Street, just past the general store," Miranda told him. "She's fair with her prices and the rooms are clean. Tell her Miranda Davies sent you, and she'll treat you right." They walked out of the church together into the late afternoon sunlight. Fort Smith was busy at this hour, with people finishing up their daily business before heading home for supper. A freight wagon rumbled past, and somewhere a dog barked. The town had grown considerably since Miranda's childhood, now boasting 2 saloons, 3 general stores, a bank, and even a small hotel in addition to the boarding houses. "Well, thank you again for your help with the bell," Miranda said, suddenly feeling awkward. She wasn't sure why this stranger's opinion seemed to matter, but she found herself hoping he thought well of her. "Like I said, it was my pleasure," Tom replied. He settled his hat back on his head and gave her a smile that made something flutter in her chest. "I hope I'll see you around town, Miss Davies. Maybe at church on Sunday." "I'll be here," Miranda said. "I play the piano for services." "Then I'll definitely be here," Tom said. "I look forward to hearing you play." He tipped his hat to her and headed down the street toward Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house. Miranda watched him go for a moment longer than was probably proper, then shook herself and headed in the opposite direction toward the small house she shared with her mother on the edge of town. Her mother, Margaret Davies, was in the kitchen when Miranda arrived, stirring something that smelled wonderful in a pot over the stove. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with gray streaked brown hair and the kind of gentle face that made children trust her instantly. "Did you get the bell working?" she asked as Miranda came in. "I did with help," Miranda said. She washed her hands in the basin by the door and dried them on a towel. "A man just rode into town and stopped by the church. He fixed it in about 10 minutes. Her mother turned to look at her with interest. "A stranger helped you? What kind of man?" "A cowboy looking for work," Miranda said, trying to sound casual. "His name is Thomas Barrett. He seemed nice enough, polite and respectful. Said he was raised to stop at church when he came to a new town." "Thomas Barrett," her mother repeated thoughtfully. "I don't know that name. Where's he from?" "I didn't ask," Miranda admitted. "But he's staying at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house and he's looking for ranch work." Her mother gave her a knowing look. "You're blushing," Miranda rose. "I am not," Miranda protested, though she could feel the heat in her cheeks. "I'm just warm from working in the bell tower." "Hum," her mother said, but she was smiling. "Well, if he comes to church on Sunday, I suppose we'll get a better look at this helpful cowboy of yours." "He's not my cowboy," Miranda said firmly, but she couldn't quite suppress her own smile. That night, lying in bed, Miranda found herself thinking about Tom Barrett. There had been something about him, something beyond just his good looks or his helpfulness. He had treated her like an equal, not questioning her ability or her right to be up in that bell tower trying to fix things herself. He had simply offered help and given it freely when she accepted. In her experience, that kind of straightforward decency was rarer than it should be. She fell asleep thinking about the way he had smiled at her, and if her dreams featured a certain brown-eyed cowboy, well, that was nobody's business but her own. The next morning, Miranda was at the schoolhouse early, preparing lessons for her students. She taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to children ranging from 6 to 14. And while the work was sometimes challenging, she loved it. There was something deeply satisfying about watching a child's face light up when they finally understood a difficult concept or successfully read a passage on their own. She was writing mathematics problems on the blackboard when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she could see a group of her students gathered around something, their voices excited. Miranda set down her chalk and went to investigate. Tom Barrett was standing in the schoolyard, and the children were clustered around his horse, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. Tom was patiently answering questions about the horse, letting the braver children pat her nose. "She's 8 years old," he was saying. "I raised her from a foal. Her name is Copper on account of her color." Miranda felt a smile tug at her lips as she watched him with the children. He had an easy way with them, neither condescending nor impatient. "Mr. Barrett," she called out, "what brings you by the school?" Tom looked up and his face brightened when he saw her. "Good morning, Miss Davies. I was just on my way to the livery stable and happened to pass by. These young folks seemed interested in Copper." "All right, children, that's enough excitement for now," Miranda said gently but firmly. "Inside, please. We have lessons to begin." The children obeyed with varying degrees of reluctance, but they went. Tom waited until they had all filed inside before approaching Miranda. "I took your advice about the livery," he said. "Mr. Crawford hired me on the spot. Said he'd been praying for someone reliable to show up." "I'm glad it worked out," Miranda said, and she realized she meant it sincerely. The thought of Tom staying in Fort Smith pleased her more than it probably should. "I'll be doing general work there, caring for the horses, repairs, that sort of thing," Tom continued. "The pay's decent, and Mr. Crawford says I can stable copper there for free as part of my wages. I'm hoping once I've saved up enough, I might be able to start my own small spread, but that's thinking ahead." "It's good to have goals," Miranda said. One of her students appeared at the window making faces, and she turned to give the child a stern look. When she looked back at Tom, he was grinning. "I should let you get to your teaching," he said. "But I was wondering if maybe, well, if it wouldn't be too forward, might I walk you home from church on Sunday, after services?" Miranda felt that flutter in her chest again. "I don't think that would be too forward at all," she said. "I'd like that." "Good," Tom said, and his smile was like sunshine. "I'll look forward to it. Have a good day with your students, Miss Davies." "Miranda, please," she said. "If I'm going to call you Tom, you should call me Miranda." "Miranda," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. "Have a good day, Miranda." She watched him ride away toward the livery, then hurried inside before her students could get completely out of hand. But all through the morning's lessons, she found herself smiling. Sunday arrived with clear skies and warm weather. Miranda took extra care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Her mother noticed but said nothing, though her eyes twinkled. At church, Miranda took her place at the piano while the congregation filed in. She spotted Tom immediately. He had cleaned up nicely, wearing what were clearly his best clothes, his hair combed back neatly. He caught her eye and smiled before taking a seat toward the middle of the church. Miranda played the hymns with perhaps a bit more feeling than usual, her fingers dancing across the keys. She had been playing since she was 7 years old, taught by her father who had believed music was a gift from God to be shared. Over the years, she had developed a real skill, and the piano had become one of her greatest joys. Reverend Clayton's sermon was about patience and faith, about trusting in God's timing for our lives. Miranda found herself wondering if perhaps God's timing had brought Tom Barrett to Fort Smith at exactly the right moment. After the service, as people milled about outside the church chatting, Tom made his way over to where Miranda stood with her mother. "Mrs. Davies," he said politely. "I'm Thomas Barrett. Your daughter was kind enough to point me toward work in town." "So you're the cowboy who fixed our bell," Margaret said, looking him over with a mother's assessing eye. "Miranda said you were quite helpful." "I was happy to lend a hand, madam," Tom said. "It's a fine church. You can tell it was built with care." "My husband oversaw much of the construction," Margaret said, and there was both sadness and pride in her voice. "It was his life's work in many ways." "Miranda told me a bit about him," Tom said gently. "He sounds like he was a remarkable man." Margaret's expression softened. He was, and he would have appreciated knowing someone was looking after the church in his absence. She turned to Miranda. "I need to speak with Mrs. Henderson about the quilting circle. You two young people enjoy your walk." She left with a knowing smile, and Miranda felt herself blush again. "Your mother's subtle as a freight train," Tom said with amusement. "She means well," Miranda said. "She's been hoping I'd find someone worth spending time with." Most of the young men in Fort Smith are either spoken for or not interested in a woman who can outshoot them. "You shoot?" Tom asked with interest. "My father taught me," Miranda said. "He said every person should know how to defend themselves and put food on the table." "I'm decent with a rifle, better with a pistol." "I'd like to see that sometime," Tom said as they began walking. The streets of Fort Smith were quiet on Sunday afternoon, most people either at church or at home with their families. "Most women I've met are afraid of guns." "I respect them," Miranda said, But I'm not afraid of them. There's a difference. Fear without understanding is dangerous. My father believed in understanding. They walked past the general store and the bank, heading toward the residential area where Miranda lived. The conversation flowed easily between them, covering everything from their childhoods to their hopes for the future. Tom told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, the son of a foreman who had taught him everything about horses and cattle. His father had died in a stampede when Tom was 19, and his mother had passed from fever the following year, leaving him alone in the world. I worked on various ranches for a while, Tom said. Saved up what I could. But Texas has gotten crowded with people trying to make their fortunes in cattle. I thought Arkansas might offer better opportunities, a chance to eventually have my own place. Fort Smith is growing, Miranda said. More people arriving every month, seems like. The railroad talks about extending a line this way, which would bring even more business. What about you? Tom asked. Have you always lived here, born and raised? Miranda said. My parents came here in '48, just before the gold rush sent everyone west. My father saw opportunity here, in building and maintaining rather than chasing after gold that might not exist. He was right, too. Fort Smith has become a real town, not just another abandoned mining camp. They reached her house, a small but well-maintained cottage with a garden out front. Roses climbed up a trellis beside the door, blooming pink and red. Your father built this too? Tom asked, taking in the careful craftsmanship evident in the construction. With his own hands, Miranda said proudly. Took him 2 years working on it whenever he had spare time. He wanted my mother to have a proper home, not just a rough cabin. He loved her very much, Tom observed. He did, Miranda agreed. They had the kind of marriage I always hoped to find someday, a partnership, you know. They respected each other, worked together, laughed together. That's what marriage should be, I think. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, I think so too. My parents were the same way. Even when times were hard, they faced it together. That's what made it bearable. They stood on the porch, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. Miranda, I know we've only just met, but I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you properly. Take you on a picnic, maybe, or for a ride if you like horses. I'd like that very much, Miranda said, her heart beating faster. I do like horses, though I should warn you I'm not the most graceful rider. I doubt that, Tom said with a smile. You seem like the type who's good at whatever you set your mind to. Flattery, Mr. Barrett, Miranda teased. Honest observation, Miss Davies, he replied. How about next Saturday? If the weather holds, we could ride out to Cedar Creek. It's supposed to be real pretty this time of year. Saturday sounds perfect, Miranda said. Tom tipped his hat to her, his eyes warm. Until Saturday, then, and I'll see you around town before then, I'm sure. Miranda watched him walk away, a smile on her face that wouldn't fade. When she went inside, her mother was waiting with tea and questions. He seems like a good young man, Margaret said as Miranda sat down at the kitchen table. Polite, respectful, and he clearly thinks highly of you. It's too soon to know anything for certain, Miranda said, but she couldn't keep the happiness out of her voice. We're going on a picnic next Saturday. Your father would have liked him, Margaret said softly. He always said the measure of a man was in what he did, not what he said. This Thomas Barrett stopped to help a stranger with no thought of reward. That speaks well of his character. Miranda sipped her tea, thinking about Tom's smile, the way he had looked at her like she was someone special. It was too soon for anything serious, she reminded herself. They barely knew each other. But something in her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something wonderful. The week passed with surprising slowness. Miranda went through her usual routines of teaching, helping her mother and maintaining the church. But her thoughts kept drifting to Tom and their upcoming picnic. She saw him a few times around town, usually at the livery when she passed by, and he always stopped what he was doing to wave and exchange a few words. On Wednesday, she saw him working on repairing the livery's roof, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he hammered new shingles into place. He worked with the same confident competence he had shown with the church bell, and Miranda found herself admiring not just his skill, but the way he took pride in doing a job well. Thursday brought rain, and Miranda spent the afternoon in the church practicing piano. She was lost in a particularly complex hymn when she realized Tom was standing in the doorway, dripping wet but smiling. "Don't stop," he said. "That's beautiful." Miranda felt self-conscious but continued playing, finishing the piece with a flourish. "You're soaked," she observed. "Were you caught in the rain, working on fence repair out at the Henderson Ranch?" Tom explained. "Storm came up sudden. I was heading back to town and saw the church door open. Thought I'd stop and dry off a bit if that's all right." "Of course," Miranda said. She gestured to the pews. "Sit, please. I'll see if I can find a towel or something." She returned with a length of clean cloth from the church's supply closet, and Tom dried his face and hands gratefully. "You're very good," he said, nodding toward the piano. "I don't know much about music, but I know what sounds nice, and that was better than nice." "My father started teaching me when I was young," Miranda said, sitting down beside him. The church felt intimate with just the two of them there, rain drumming on the roof. "He said music could express what words sometimes couldn't. When he died, playing helped me work through the grief." Tom reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I understand that. After my mother passed, I spent a lot of time just riding. Being with my horse, out in open country, it was the only thing that made sense when nothing else did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain. Miranda was acutely aware of Tom's hand holding hers, the warmth of his presence beside her. "Miranda," Tom said finally, "I want to be honest with you about something. I came to Fort Smith looking for work, yes, but also looking for a place to belong. I've been drifting for a few years now, never quite finding where I fit. But since I got here, since I met you, this town feels different. Feels like maybe it could be home." Miranda's heart swelled at his words. "I hope it does become home for you," she said softly. "Fort Smith's a good town with good people, and I'd like you to stay." "Because of the town?" Tom asked. "Or because of something else?" Miranda met his eyes directly. "Both. But mostly because I've enjoyed every moment I've spent with you, and I'd like there to be many more such moments." Tom smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." "I know it's fast, but Miranda, I've never felt this way about anyone before. You're smart and capable and beautiful, and being around you makes me want to be better, do better, build something lasting." "It is fast," Miranda agreed, "but sometimes things that seem right don't need a lot of time to prove it. My parents knew each other only 3 months before they married, and they had 30 happy years together." The rain began to ease, softening to a gentle patter. Tom reluctantly released Miranda's hand and stood. "I should get back before the storm picks up again," he said. "But I'm looking forward to Saturday more than ever." "So am I," Miranda said, walking him to the door. He paused on the threshold, looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and she realized she wanted him to. But instead, he just touched her cheek gently with his fingertips. "Until Saturday," he said, and then he was gone, striding out into the drizzle toward the livery. Saturday dawned clear and beautiful, perfect picnic weather. Miranda packed a basket with fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of her mother's famous pickles. Her mother had added a small apple pie when Miranda wasn't looking, wrapped carefully in cloth. Tom arrived mid-morning leading 2 horses, his mare Copper and a gentle gelding named Biscuit that belonged to the livery. "Mr. Crawford said Biscuit here is the most patient horse he's got," Tom explained as he helped Miranda into the saddle. "He won't give you any trouble." They rode out of town, heading east toward Cedar Creek. It was a beautiful May morning, warm but not too hot, with wildflowers blooming in the fields they passed. Tom had been right about Miranda being a better rider than she claimed. She sat the horse well, moving naturally with its gait. They talked as they rode, the conversation ranging from serious to silly. Tom told her stories about his adventures working various ranches, including the time he had to retrieve a bull that had somehow gotten itself stuck in a mud hole and required half the ranch crew to pull it out. Miranda shared stories from her teaching, like the day 2 of her students had brought a snake to school and hidden it in a desk, causing chaos when another student discovered it. Cedar Creek was just as pretty as Tom had promised, a clear stream running through a grove of cottonwood trees. They tied the horses where they could graze and spread a blanket near the water's edge. The picnic was perfect. They ate and talked and laughed, and Miranda couldn't remember the last time she had felt so completely happy and comfortable with someone. Tom had a way of listening that made her feel heard, really heard, not just waiting for his turn to speak. After they ate, they walked along the creek, Tom pointing out different plants and animals. He knew a surprising amount about the natural world, could identify birds by their calls, and knew which plants were edible or medicinal. "My mother was part Cherokee," he told Miranda. "Just a quarter, but she learned a lot from her grandmother. She taught me to pay attention to the land, to learn from it. Said we were all connected, people and nature, and the more we understood that, the better we'd live." "That's beautiful," Miranda said. "I'd like to learn more about that if you're willing to teach me." "I'd be happy to," Tom said. He picked a wildflower, a delicate purple bloom, and tucked it behind her ear. "There. Now you look like you belong here, part of the landscape." Miranda blushed but didn't remove the flower. They found a fallen log by the creek and sat watching the water flow past, diamonds of sunlight dancing on its surface. "Tom," Miranda said after a while, "can I ask you something personal?" "Anything," he said. "What are you really looking for?" "I mean, you said you wanted to belong somewhere, to build something lasting. What does that look like to you?" Tom was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I want a place of my own," he said finally. "Not a huge spread, nothing fancy. Just enough land for a house, some horses, maybe some cattle. A place where I can work hard and see the results, where I can build something for the future. And I want a family, a wife who's a true partner, children to teach and watch grow. I want what my parents had before they died, that sense of being rooted somewhere, of mattering to people and having them matter to me." "That sounds wonderful," Miranda said softly. "I want similar things. I love teaching, and I'd want to continue that if I could. But I also want a home full of love and laughter, children running around, someone to share the burdens and the joys with." Tom turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart race. "Miranda Davies, I know we've only known each other a week, and this might be the craziest thing I've ever done, but I have to tell you that I'm falling in love with you. You're everything I didn't even know I was looking for, and I can't imagine my future without you in it." Miranda's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. "That's not crazy at all," she whispered, "because I'm falling in love with you too. It feels like I've known you forever instead of just days, like my heart recognized you the moment you walked into that church." Tom cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. "May I kiss you, please?" Miranda breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and perfect. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tender and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and dreaming and stealing more kisses. By the time they rode back to town as the sun was setting, they had an understanding. They would court properly, let people get used to the idea of them together. But they both knew where this was heading. Over the following weeks, Tom became a fixture in Miranda's life and in the life of Fort Smith. He was good at his work at the livery, reliable and skilled, and Mr. Crawford sang his praises to anyone who would listen. On Sundays, Tom attended church faithfully, always sitting where he could watch Miranda play piano. Afterward, he would walk her home, and they would spend the afternoon together, sometimes with Margaret joining them, sometimes alone. Tom started helping out around Miranda's house, fixing things that had needed attention since her father died. He repaired the roof where it had been leaking, reinforced the porch stairs, and built a new gate for the garden. He never asked for anything in return, but Margaret always made sure he stayed for dinner, and Miranda suspected her mother was matchmaking as hard as she could. One evening in late June, Tom and Miranda were sitting on the porch swing after dinner, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Margaret had discreetly gone inside, leaving them alone. "I spoke to Mr. Henderson today," Tom said. "He's willing to sell me 50 acres on the eastern edge of his property. It's good land with a stream running through it and some timber. The price is fair, and he says I can pay it off over 5 years. Miranda sat up excitedly. "Tom, that's wonderful. Are you going to do it?" "I am," he said, "but I wanted to talk to you first. If I buy that land, I'll be putting down real roots here. I'll be committed to Fort Smith for the long haul, and I wanted to make sure that's something you'd want too." "Of course it is," Miranda said, taking his hand. "This is my home, and I want it to be yours too." Tom took a deep breath. "There's more. If I buy that land, I want to build a house on it. A good house, solid and well-made, big enough for a family. Miranda, I want to build our house if you'll have me." Miranda's breath caught. "Tom, are you asking what I think you're asking?" He slid off the swing and onto one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy but clearly chosen with care. "Miranda Davies, I love you with everything I am. You're my best friend, my dream come true, the answer to prayers I didn't even know how to say. I know we haven't known each other long by most people's standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, raise a family with me, grow old with me?" Tears were streaming down Miranda's face, but she was smiling the biggest smile of her life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Tom, of course I'll marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her deeply while she laughed and cried at the same time. The door opened and Margaret appeared, her own eyes wet with tears. "I heard from the window," she admitted. "Tom, welcome to the family. My husband would have been so happy to know Miranda found someone like you." They set a date for late September, giving them time to finish the house Tom was building on his new land and to plan a proper wedding. The whole town seemed excited about the upcoming marriage. Tom was well liked, and everyone agreed that he and Miranda made a perfect match. Through July and August, Tom worked on the house whenever he wasn't at the livery. Miranda helped when she could, and on weekends, friends from town would come out to lend a hand. It became a community project, with people contributing labor, materials, and expertise. The Hendersons donated timber from their property. Mr. Crawford helped with the heavy lifting despite his arthritis. Even Reverend Clayton came out to bless the foundation. The house took shape gradually, rising from the Arkansas soil like a promise being fulfilled. Tom built it with care, remembering how Miranda had described her father's work. Every board was carefully placed, every nail driven true. It was a 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Tom built a separate room that could serve as a schoolroom, thinking of Miranda's love of teaching. "If you want to keep teaching the town children, that's wonderful," he told her as they stood in the unfinished house one evening. "But I thought maybe you might also want to teach our children and any neighbor children who need it. This could be a school for the whole area." Miranda threw her arms around him. "It's perfect. You're perfect. How did I get so lucky I'm the lucky one?" Tom insisted, kissing her forehead. "I was just drifting before I came here. You gave me purpose, a reason to build something lasting." As September approached, wedding preparations intensified. Margaret sewed Miranda's dress, a beautiful creation in white silk with lace overlay. The whole town was invited to the ceremony, which would be held in the church where Tom and Miranda had first met. The night before the wedding, Miranda stood in the church alone, looking around at the space that had brought Tom into her life. She ran her fingers over the piano keys, playing softly. "I wish you were here, Papa," she whispered into the empty church. "I wish you could meet him, could see how happy he makes me. I think you'd like him. I think you'd be proud." The church bell rang then, clear and sweet, though no one had pulled the rope. Miranda smiled through her tears. Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe it was her father's way of saying he was there, that he approved, that he was happy for her. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. The church was packed with well-wishers, every pew filled. Margaret sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Mr. Crawford stood up with Tom as his best man, and Miranda's childhood friend Sarah served as her bridesmaid. Miranda walked down the aisle alone, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers tied with white ribbon. She had considered asking Mr. Henderson or Reverend Clayton to give her away, but somehow it felt right to walk on her own, to come to Tom as her own woman, making her own choice. Tom stood at the altar in a new suit, his eyes locked on Miranda as she approached. The love and joy on his face made her heart soar. When she reached him, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. Reverend Clayton performed the ceremony, his old voice strong and sure as he spoke about love and commitment, partnership and faith. When it came time for the vows, Tom's voice was steady and clear. "I, Thomas Barrett, take you, Miranda Davies, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams and share your burdens. I promise to build a life with you that would make both our parents proud." Miranda's voice shook slightly with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "I, Miranda Davies, take you, Thomas Barrett, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams and share your burdens. I promise to build a life with you full of love and laughter and faith." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that matched. When Reverend Clayton pronounced them husband and wife, the whole church erupted in applause. Tom kissed Miranda thoroughly, and she kissed him back, not caring that everyone was watching. The reception was held outside the church, with tables set up in the yard. People had brought food enough to feed an army. There was music and dancing, laughter and celebration. Miranda danced with Tom, with Mr. Crawford, with young boys from her school. Tom danced with Margaret, with Sarah, with Mrs. Sullivan from the boarding house. As the sun began to set, Tom and Miranda slipped away from the celebration. They rode out to their new house, their home, as husband and wife. Tom had finished it the week before, and friends had helped furnish it with donations and purchases. It was simple but comfortable, a real home. Tom carried Miranda over the threshold, both of them laughing. Inside, candles had been lit, casting a warm glow over everything. Someone, probably Margaret, had left flowers in vases throughout the rooms and stocked the kitchen with food. "Welcome home, Mrs. Barrett," Tom said, setting Miranda on her feet. "Welcome home, Mr. Barrett," she replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. Their wedding night was everything it should be, tender and passionate and full of love. They lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly about their future. "I want lots of children," Miranda said, her head on Tom's chest. "At least 4, maybe more." "I want whatever makes you happy," Tom said, running his fingers through her long hair. "Though I have to admit, the idea of a house full of little ones sounds pretty good to me too." "What should we name them?" Miranda asked sleepily. "We have time to figure that out," Tom said with a smile. "But I like traditional names, strong names, names with meaning." They drifted off to sleep planning their future, and in the morning woke to their first day as husband and wife. The next months were blissful. Tom continued working at the livery while building up his own small herd of cattle on his land. Miranda kept teaching, both at the town school and beginning to tutor children from neighboring farms at their home on weekends. They worked together on the property, planting a garden, building a barn, establishing their homestead. Their first Christmas as a married couple was simple but perfect. They invited Margaret to stay with them, and the 3 of them created new traditions together. Margaret taught Tom how to make her special Christmas cookies, the recipe her own mother had brought from Germany. Tom and Miranda cut down a small pine tree and decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the schoolchildren had made. In February, Miranda discovered she was pregnant. She told Tom one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully as she shared the news. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy lit up his features, and he pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're going to be parents," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby." They told Margaret together, and she was equally thrilled. "A grandchild," she said wonderingly. "Oh, my dears, this is wonderful news." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Miranda continued teaching through spring, though she tired more easily. Tom was wonderfully attentive, helping with everything, never letting her overexert herself. He built a beautiful cradle in his spare time, carving details into the headboard with painstaking care. In early October, Miranda went into labor. It was a long labor, nearly 20 hours, but Tom stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, loving her through every contraction. Margaret served as midwife, her calm presence reassuring them both. Finally, as dawn broke on October 3rd, their son was born. He came into the world crying lustily, a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair in his father's brown eyes. "We have a son," Tom said in wonder, cradling the baby carefully. "Miranda, we have a son." They named him James Michael Barrett, James after Tom's father and Michael after Miranda's. Little James was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Tom was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing to him in a surprisingly good voice. Miranda had worried that having a baby might change things between her and Tom, but if anything, it brought them closer. They were partners in parenthood as they were in everything else, supporting each other, sharing responsibilities, finding joy in every milestone. As James grew from infant to toddler, the Barrett homestead prospered. Tom's cattle herd increased, and he developed a reputation for raising quality stock. Miranda's teaching expanded, and she began holding regular classes at their home for children from surrounding farms. They added onto the house, building a proper one-room schoolhouse attached to the main structure. When James was 2, Miranda became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was harder, the labor was shorter. In June of 1876, they welcomed twin daughters, Emma Grace and Hannah Rose. Tom was beside himself with joy over his daughters. He doted on them shamelessly, and Miranda teased him that he was going to spoil them rotten. But watching him with the girls, so gentle and loving, made her heart swell. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Tom worked the ranch with help from hired hands as the operation grew. Miranda taught, cared for the children, and managed the household. They attended church every Sunday, where James was already learning to play piano from his mother, showing an early aptitude for music. Margaret was a constant presence in their lives, helping with the children and the household. She had moved into a small cottage that Tom had built for her on their property, close enough to visit daily but far enough to give the young family privacy. The years passed in a blur of happiness. More children came. Another son they named Robert Thomas when James was 5, and a final daughter, Caroline Margaret, 2 years after that. 5 children in all, a lively, loving bunch who filled the house with noise and laughter. Tom expanded the ranch significantly, buying more land from Henderson and building it into one of the most successful operations in the area. But he never lost sight of what mattered most. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, he made time for his family. Dinner was always eaten together, with everyone sharing about their day. After the children were in bed, Tom and Miranda would sit on the porch, talking and planning, still as in love as they had been that first week. When James turned 12, Tom began teaching him ranching in earnest, taking him out to work the cattle and repair fences. But he also encouraged his son's musical talents, paying for piano lessons from a teacher in Little Rock who traveled to Fort Smith monthly. The twins were inseparable, 2 peas in a pod with their mother's determination and their father's sunny disposition. They helped Miranda with the teaching, learning to read before they were 4 and already helping younger students with their letters. Robert was quieter than his siblings, more introspective, but he had a gift with animals that amazed even Tom. He could gentle the wildest horse, and cattle seemed to calm in his presence. Little Caroline was the baby, adored by everyone, with a stubborn streak a mile wide and enough charm to get away with almost anything. Miranda had stopped teaching at the town school after the twins were born, but her home school had grown significantly. She now taught nearly 20 children from the surrounding area, and Tom had built a larger schoolhouse to accommodate them all. It was the work she loved, shaping young minds, and she felt blessed to be able to do it while still being present for her own children. In 1882, tragedy struck when Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. The whole family mourned her loss deeply. She had been not just a grandmother but a vital part of their daily lives, a source of wisdom and unconditional love. They buried her next to Miranda's father in the Fort Smith Cemetery, and Reverend Clayton, now ancient himself, spoke movingly about a woman who had embodied grace and kindness. Miranda played a hymn at the service, her fingers finding the keys through her tears, playing the song her mother had always loved best. Tom held Miranda close that night as she grieved. "She lived a good life," he reminded her gently. "She saw you happy, saw her grandchildren grow. She knew she was loved." "I know," Miranda whispered, "but I'll miss her so much." "We all will," Tom agreed. but we'll honor her memory by living the way she taught us, with love and faith and kindness." Time marched on, as it always does. James grew into a fine young man, talented in both music and ranching. At 19, he announced his intention to attend a music conservatory in St. Louis, wanting to pursue composition. Tom and Miranda supported his dream, though they missed him terribly when he left. The twins were courted by half the young men in the county, but they were picky, waiting for the right matches. Emma eventually married a banker's son from Little Rock, a kind young man who adored her. Hannah fell for a circuit rider preacher and traveled with him throughout Arkansas, teaching children in remote communities about reading and faith. Robert took to ranching like he had been born to it, and Tom knew the Barrett ranch would be in good hands when he eventually passed it on. Caroline showed interest in medicine, shadowed the town doctor, and talked about becoming a nurse, though that was still considered a bit scandalous for a young woman. Through it all, Tom and Miranda's love never wavered. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration or worry. Raising 5 children and running a ranch and a school was never easy, but they faced every challenge together, never forgetting the promises they had made to each other in that church so many years ago. On their 20th anniversary, Tom took Miranda back to Cedar Creek, to the spot where he had proposed. The cottonwoods had grown taller, but the creek still burbled along just as it had that day. 20 years, Tom marveled, pulling Miranda close. 20 years since the luckiest day of my life. "We've built a good life," Miranda said, leaning into him. "Better than I ever dreamed." "Do you remember what you said to me once about your parents having the kind of marriage you hope to find?" Tom asked. "A partnership." "I remember," Miranda said. "I hope we've given our children the same example," Tom said. "I hope they've seen what real love looks like, so they'll know what to look for in their own lives." "I think they have," Miranda said. "Look at the choices they're making. James following his passion for music. Emma marrying for love, not money. Hannah using her gifts to serve others. Robert building on what we started, and Caroline pushing boundaries to follow her dreams. We did something right." They stayed at the creek until sunset, holding each other and remembering, not just their anniversary but all the moments that had led them here. The day in the church, the first picnic, the wedding, the births of their children, the laughter and tears and everything in between. As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Miranda looked at Tom and felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that very first day. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still her Tom, still the man who had climbed into a church bell tower to help a stranger and ended up finding his whole future. Life continued its rhythm through the years. Tom retired from active ranching at 60, turning the operation over to Robert, who ran it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. James made a name for himself as a composer, his music performed in concert halls across the country. Emma had 4 children and brought them to visit often. Hannah and her preacher husband established a mission school that served hundreds of children. Caroline became one of the first trained nurses in Arkansas, working at a hospital in Little Rock, but coming home frequently. Tom and Miranda settled into a peaceful routine, still living in the house Tom had built with his own hands. They tended a garden, spent time with grandchildren, and on Sundays still attended church together, though others played the piano now. They would sit in the same pew, holding hands like newlyweds, and people would smile to see them, this couple who had shown the whole town what love could be. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch in rocking chairs Tom had made, watching the sun set over their land, over the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Miranda asked one evening. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp of mind and full of love. "Regret what?" Tom asked, genuinely puzzled. "Stopping that day," Miranda said. "When you saw me in the bell tower, you could have just kept riding, found work somewhere else, built a different life." Tom reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "That was the day my real life began. Everything before was just waiting, and everything after has been grace." "I love you, Thomas Barrett," Miranda said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Miranda Barrett," Tom replied. "From the first moment I saw you fighting with that bell rope, so determined and stubborn and beautiful. I loved you then, I love you now, and I'll love you forever." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. Years later, when Tom passed away peacefully at the age of 78 with Miranda holding his hand, the church bell in Fort Smith rang without anyone pulling the rope, just as it had the night before Miranda's wedding. Some said it was the wind. Others said it was a sign. But Miranda knew it was Tom's way of saying goodbye, of letting her know he was at peace. She lived 2 more years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy of love that Tom and Miranda had established. She spent her final days in the house Tom had built, in the bedroom where all their children had been born, looking out the window at the land they had made their own. On the day Miranda passed, also peacefully and surrounded by family, the church bell rang again, and this time everyone knew what it meant. It was Tom welcoming her home, calling her to the next adventure, the one they would face together as they had faced everything in life. They buried Miranda beside Tom in the Fort Smith cemetery, under a large oak tree. The headstone was simple but spoke volumes about the life they had shared and the love that had sustained them through it all. Thomas Barrett, beloved husband, father, and friend, and Miranda Barrett, beloved wife, mother, and teacher. Together in life, together in eternity. Their love built a legacy that continues. At the funeral, James played a piece he had composed just for the occasion, a beautiful melody that spoke of love and loss and hope. All 5 children were there with their families, dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them proof of what Tom and Miranda had created together. Reverend Clayton's grandson, who now held his grandfather's position, spoke about love that endures, about partnerships that strengthen, about faith that sustains. He told the story of how Tom had stopped to help a stranger fix a church bell and found his whole future in that moment. "They showed us all what marriage should be," he said. "A true partnership built on love and respect and faith. They raised their children with those same values, and those children are now raising their own children the same way." Tom and Miranda Barrett's legacy isn't just in the land they owned or the wealth they accumulated. It's in the lives they touched, the love they shared, and the example they set. That's a legacy that will never die. As the service ended and people filed past the graves to pay their respects, the church bell rang one final time, clear and pure and perfect. It was a sound of celebration, of 2 souls reunited, of a love story that had reached its earthly end but would continue forever. The Barrett Ranch continued to thrive under Robert's management, and he made sure to maintain the schoolhouse his mother had loved, keeping it open for local children. James's music became famous, with pieces performed throughout America and Europe, and he always dedicated his work to his parents, who had encouraged his dreams. Emma's children carried on the family tradition of service and love. Hannah's mission school educated thousands of children over the decades. Caroline revolutionized nursing practices in Arkansas, and trained a generation of medical professionals. But perhaps the greatest legacy Tom and Miranda left was simpler than any of that. They showed everyone who knew them that true love was possible, that it could last a lifetime, that it could weather any storm. They proved that a chance meeting could change everything, that listening to your heart could lead you to your destiny. Years after Miranda's death, when the old church was being renovated, workers found something carved into one of the beams in the bell tower. It was faint, worn by time, but still readable. 2 sets of initials inside a heart, TB and MD, and below it, a date from 1874, just a few months after they had met. Tom must have carved it one day when he was helping maintain the church, a secret declaration of love hidden in the place where their story began. It was preserved during the renovation, protected now behind glass, a reminder to everyone who saw it that love can strike like lightning, sudden and transformative, if you're brave enough to reach for it when it comes. The town of Fort Smith grew and changed over the decades, but the Barrett story remained a touchstone, told and retold to new generations. The house Tom built still stood strong, lived in now by Robert's grandchildren, its walls holding memories of love and laughter and family. The church where Tom and Miranda married continued to serve the community, the bell still ringing clearly, calling people to worship and celebration. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was right, people swore they could hear piano music drifting across the land, a hymn played with skill and love, and they would smile and remember Miranda. Or they would see a cowboy riding across the fields at sunset, sitting tall and proud in the saddle, and think of Tom. The Barrett family grew large and spread far, but they always came back to Fort Smith for reunions, gathering at the old homestead to remember where they came from, to honor the love that had started it all. They would visit the cemetery, laying flowers on those twin graves, telling their children and grandchildren the story of how a cowboy stopped to help a woman fix a church bell and found his whole world in the process. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. Because in the end, love was what mattered most. Not wealth or fame or power, but the simple, profound connection between 2 souls who chose each other and kept choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. Tom and Miranda had understood that from the beginning, had built their entire lives around that truth. And in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them, a legacy of love that would ripple through generations, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring hearts they would never know. That was the real miracle, the true happily ever after. Not just that they found each other, though that was remarkable enough, but that the love they shared became a light that never went out, a warmth that never faded, a hope that endured long after they were gone. In Fort Smith, Arkansas, in a small cemetery under an oak tree, 2 graves sat side by side. The people who rested there had lived full lives, rich with purpose and meaning and joy. They had loved deeply, laughed often, worked hard, and left the world better than they found it. And every Sunday, when the church bell rang across Fort Smith, calling the faithful to worship, it seemed to ring a little brighter, a little clearer, as if celebrating still the love story that had begun in that very church so many years ago. The cowboy had heard wedding bells that day when he found her fixing the church bell, and he had been right to listen. Those bells had rung for him and Miranda on their wedding day, had rung for their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren as they married in turn, and would keep ringing for generations to come. A constant reminder that love, true love, endures forever.